Welcome to the Part S channel. Today we explain Prophet Samuel 2, chapter 6, in a clear and simple way, step by step. Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to track the Ark's journey chronologically today. We'll start with the context and that first journey, then look at the tragedy at Nakon, bringing the Ark into Jerusalem, the conflict with Michal, some key ideas in Peshat, and finally, wrap it up with some practical life lessons and a recap. We are jumping into a truly pivotal moment in the biblical narrative. King David has just captured Jerusalem, and right now, he wants to bring the absolute ultimate symbol of God's presence, the Ark of the Covenant, straight into his new capital. But before we really get going, it's absolutely crucial we set our ground rules for today. We are reading this chapter strictly through the lens of Peshat. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, Peshat just means the plain, simple, and literal meaning of the text. That means we're focusing entirely on the who, what, where, and why, exactly as it's written. We're looking closely at the original Hebrew words and their direct, plain English translation to draw out the clear narrative. So no hidden meanings, no esoteric or deep Kabbalistic secrets here today, just the powerful, practical, everyday implications of the story. All right, Section 1, Context and the First Journey. Let's look at the first 5 verses where David makes his initial attempt to move the Ark. So right here in the original Hebrew text, we see King David gathering 30,000 chosen men of Israel. Think about that number for a second. 30,000. Why so many? Well, he wants to demonstrate this immense national unity and really solidify his new royal power. This isn't just a quiet transport with a couple of guys. It is a massive state-sponsored event. They head over to Baalei, Judah, which the text also identifies geographically as Kiryat Jearim, to retrieve the Ark of God. And the text makes a point to note that this Ark is called by the name of the Lord of hosts who sits upon the cherubim. It's incredibly holy. But here's where things get interesting. To move this incredibly holy object, they put it on a brand new cart. They bring it out of the house of a man named Abinadab, whose house is situated up on a hill. And driving this shiny new cart are 2 of Abinadab's sons, Uzzah and Ahio, with Ahio walking right in front to guide it. Now, you really have to picture the scene here. Verse 5 tells us that David and the entire house of Israel were just celebrating, playing before the Lord with all kinds of instruments. The joy is absolutely off the charts. They've got instruments made of cypress wood, harps, psalteries, timbrels, sistra, cymbals, literally the whole shebang. It's this loud, joyous, magnificent parade. They are honoring God the absolute best way they know how, pouring immense effort and resources into this huge procession. Honestly, looking at it, you'd think this was going to be a complete and total success. Which brings us to Section 2, the tragedy at Nakon. Because in verses 6 through 11, that celebratory music suddenly stops. They get to Nakon's threshing floor, and something completely unexpected and really terrifying happens. The text tells us, very simply, the oxen stumbled. You know, it's a perfectly normal, everyday thing when you're driving a heavy cart over rough ground. But seeing that cart tilt, Uzzah does something entirely instinctive. He reaches out his hand to steady the holy Ark of God. He grabs hold of it. It's a split-second, deeply human reflex. I mean, wouldn't anyone do that if they saw a precious object falling into the dirt? But man, the consequence of that reflex is just shocking. So, what does this all mean? Why did God consider this an irreverent act that deserved immediate death? Because verse 7 states clearly that the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God smote him right there for his error, or his irreverence, and he died right there beside the ark. Reading the plain text, the ark isn't just a sacred box. It's the physical manifestation of God's intense holiness. And God's law explicitly required the ark to be carried on poles resting on the shoulders of specific Levites, the Kohathites. It was absolutely not meant to be loaded onto a cart like common cargo, and it was forbidden to be touched, period. So Uzzah's touch, even if he had the best intentions to save it from a fall, was a severe violation of a strictly defined sacred boundary. Can you imagine the absolute emotional whiplash David experiences here? Verse 8 tells us he was displeased. He was deeply, deeply angry because the Lord had broken forth upon Uzzah. In fact, he names the place Perez Uzzah, which translates to the breach of Uzzah, a name it kept from that day forward. But that intense anger quickly shifts to profound, paralyzing terror. In verse 9, David asks, "How shall the ark of the Lord come unto me?" He is completely terrified of this power. So he shuts the whole thing down. He stops the procession immediately, refuses to bring the ark into his city, and instead he detours it to the nearby house of a man named Obed-Edom the Gittite. Just like that, the parade ends abruptly, the 30,000 men disperse, and the ark is left sitting quietly in a private home. All right, Section 3, bringing the ark to Jerusalem. Verses 12 through 19 cover David's second attempt. So verses 11 and 12 state that the ark remained in the house of Obed-Edom for 3 whole months. Now here's an interesting detail. Obed-Edom is a Gittite, meaning he's originally from the Philistine city of Gath, yet the Lord profoundly blesses him and his entire household. When King David is told about this, his perspective completely shifts. He realizes that God's power is effectively neutral. It is a deadly force when the boundaries are disrespected, but it brings immense, life-giving blessing when housed with proper reverence. Seeing Obed-Edom blessed, David decides to try again. He goes down to bring the ark up from Obed-Edom's house to the city of David, and this time with a very different mindset. Because this time, his approach is entirely by the book. David trades the human efficiency of a cart for proper, reverent instruction. Look at verse 13. Notice the words, "When they that bore the ark." There is no new cart. The Levites are physically bearing it, carrying it properly on their shoulders. And the text says that when the carriers had taken just 6 paces, literally 6 steps, David stopped everything to sacrifice an ox and a fatling. Just 6 steps. Think about how painstakingly slow, deliberate, and bloody this journey was compared to the fast, easy ride of that first attempt. Every few feet, they are stopping to acknowledge the absolute gravity of the holy. Then we get to verse 14, and it is absolutely iconic. David dances before the Lord with all his might. He has stripped off his heavy, glorious royal robes, and instead, he's wearing a basic linen ephod. It's like a simple apron-like priestly garment. He's totally humbling himself to lead the entire house of Israel with shouting and the blasting of the horn. Reading through verses 17 to 19, you see they actually pull it off. They successfully bring the ark into Jerusalem and set it inside a pitched tent. David offers burnt offerings and peace offerings, blesses the people, and even acts as a generous priestly king, distributing a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins to every single Israelite man and woman there before they go home. It is a complete triumph.
But section 4, conflict with Michal, because the celebration doesn't last.
This huge public victory immediately turns into a really bitter domestic dispute. Back in verse 16, as the ark was entering the city, David's wife Michal looked out the window, saw him leaping and dancing, and the text says she despised him in her heart. Now, in verse 20, David returns home to bless his own household, but Michal comes out to meet him with dripping sarcasm. Listen to this. "How glorious was the king of Israel today, who uncovered himself as one of the vain fellows." She is horrified. As Saul's daughter, she represents that old, rigid, aristocratic way of ruling. To her, a king needs to look dignified, and David's passionate grassroots worship just looks completely vulgar. It's a fascinating clash of perspectives. Michal only cares about the royal optics, while David cares only about honoring God. His response in verses 21 and 22 is just fierce. He tells her, "It was before the Lord who chose me above your father, therefore will I play before the Lord." He straight up reminds her that God stripped the kingdom from her dad, Saul, to give it to him. Then he drops this profound statement, "I will be base in my own sight." He's basically saying true worship requires the death of the ego. He doesn't care about looking like a majestic human king. He only cares about showing his submission before the ultimate king. And those servant girls she thought he degraded himself in front of, David says they will actually hold him in honor for his sincere devotion.
And verse 23 ends the encounter with a really sharp final note. "And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child unto the day of her death." Sticking strictly to our Peshat reading, the text simply gives us the stark consequence without over-spiritualizing it. Whether God miraculously closed her womb or David just refused to ever have intimate relations with her again after this brutal argument, the literal result is identical. Her royal pride totally isolated her, and her entire lineage and legacy were permanently cut off.
Moving on to section 5, key ideas and Peshat. Let's pull all these plain meanings we've just uncovered together. I love this table because it perfectly maps out the central theme of the entire chapter. Your literal approach to the holy completely dictates your outcome. Just look at it. Uzzah prioritized convenience over obedience, touched the holy with casual instinct, and the result was death. Obed-Edom made space for the holy with proper reverence, and his entire household was blessed. David started with grand but flawed intentions, corrected his course through deep humility, and experienced incredible joy. And Michal stood apart, judging the holy celebration through a lens of her own ego, which resulted in a legacy of emptiness. Finally, section 6, life lessons and recap. So, what should you take away from this explainer for your own life? Well, the big one is that good intentions simply aren't enough. We literally must obey and approach the divine with genuine awe and sincerity. Uzzah definitely meant well. He wanted to save the ark from falling, but his action lacked the necessary respect for God's clear commands. It's a tough lesson, but we must approach what is holy on its terms, not our own convenient terms. Plus, David teaches us that sincere devotion to God is far more important than how we look to our peers. We really shouldn't let pride or the fear of looking undignified stop us from expressing genuine joy. In recap, David's journey with the ark teaches us this really profound balance between fearing God's holiness and rejoicing in his presence. That first attempt failed because it relied on human efficiency, a fancy new cart, instead of sacred instruction. And the tragedy at Uzzah definitely taught David the immense fear of the Lord. But watching Obed-Edom taught him that God's holiness is also incredibly life-giving when it's respected. That's why the second successful journey was slow, sacrifice-laden, and most importantly, deeply, beautifully humble. So, I'll leave you with this question. Does your life reflect the joyful humility of David or the judgmental pride of Michal? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.